All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Fiso Zondo. I'm the head of School of Communication at the University of Johannesburg. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this wonderful occasion. This is our one-day conference that we are organizing here at the University of Johannesburg, where we are celebrating 30 years of democracy in South Africa and Lithuania, which marks a very profound milestone in the history of both nations. Despite differing paths, both countries transitioned to democracy in the early 1990s, reshaping their political landscapes and empowering citizens. In South Africa, 1994 saw the end of apartheid and the election of Nelson Mandela as the country's first black president, symbolizing hope, unity, and the beginning of a new era. The democratic process opened avenues for equality, social transformation, and nation building. Yet the journey has also highlighted the ongoing challenges of economic inequality, social justice, and political reform. Similarly, Lithuania emerged from Soviet rule in 1990, marking its independence and establishing democratic governance. This transition brought political freedom and economic opportunity, laying the groundwork for its entry into the European Union and NATO. Like South Africa, Lithuania has faced its own set of challenges, but has made significant strides in economic development, governance, and aligning with Western institutions. Now, 30 years later, both nations reflect on these journeys with a mix of celebration and introspection, considering the achievements of freedom, national identity, and progress, while acknowledging that work is still required to realize the full promise of democracy. In doing this, we have organized this one-day conference. We want to reflect on the 3 decades of democracy in South Africa and Lithuania by looking at the legacies of oppression that persist, and to also reflect on our post-oppression institutions. So I'm not doing this alone. Before anything happens, I want to take this opportunity to welcome to the podium Professor Bhaso Ndzendze, who's the Vice Dean of Internationalization.
Thank you very much, Chair Dr. Zondo. So mine is to welcome those who will welcome us this morning. At UJ, we believe in authentic decolonization. We don't just write about it, but we practice it. And so we've embarked on an initiative to honor those who sacrificed to ensure the freedom and the liberties that we enjoy today. I think we would all agree in Lithuania, in South Africa, that freedom is not free. And so an initiative by the faculty led by the Africa Center for Epistemology and the Philosophy of Science, and in partnership with our American partner, the Buffett Institute for Global Affairs at Northwestern University, we are honored to be in the presence of 2 phenomenal heroes of our nation who were at the forefront of the June 16, 1976 Soweto uprising, and later went to exile. And so to properly constitute this event in an authentically African way, please give a warm and grateful UJ welcome to our elders, Mayor Elizabeth More and Mayor Joyce Dipale. May we all please stand. May we all please stand.
Good morning, everyone. Dumelang, Sanbonani. I welcome everyone in this room. My name is Elizabeth More. I'm not alone. I'm with Mama Joyce Dipale. We are from the Freedom Fighters community in Soweto, from the June 16 Foundation. I would like to say something about myself and Mama Joyce. Myself and Joyce Dipale are a living proof of people who have lived through the sad apartheid era. In the same breath, we are the same people who have been fortunate to live through the 30 years of democracy, because some or most of our fellow comrades didn't make it to see the fruits of their labor in the fight for liberation. Mama Joyce went to exile, and before she went to exile, she was tortured, went through different kinds of jail, tortured and everything. And so because of the torturing and everything that she went through, she's living with aphasia. Aphasia is a stroke. That's now that her speech is impaired, and also the memory. So I will ask her just to say hello to everyone and welcome.
Thank you, Professor and Professor Baby Dimpo. Thank you so much. You know, RB Sex, Harare, born, same thing, same story. Oh my God. Same thing, torture, me and everybody, Biko, my brother, John Foster Square, Biko, Pretoria, everywhere, lots and lots and lots, and died, but survived. Thank you so much. At least few of them survived, but lots and lots and lots. Me, 4 bullets,
Gaborone. That is in Botswana.
Yeah, but survived. So my brother hard luck died, Biko died, Judge Bisset survived, but there's same thing exactly, Gaborone and Bisset Harare. So same thing, policemen silly, but survived. Thank you.
Thank you so much for welcoming us to this event, Mama Joyce and Mama Elizabeth. It is indeed an honor to have you in our presence, because while we are commemorating 30 years of democracy in our country, it is very, very important for us to also see the veterans that lived through that painful and dehumanizing era. So now indeed we feel that this event has been legitimized. Thank you. Right, now I will hand over to our Vice Dean, Academic, Professor Connie Menkes.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Dr. Zondo, and thank you to everyone being here this morning. So I'm going to start off with some formalities. So I'm going to start off by saying Your Excellency, Ambassador Rasa Jankauskaitė, the Lithuanian delegation and the delegations of the Czech Republic and of the European Union today present, our honored struggled veterans, Mrs. Joy Dipale, Mrs. Elizabeth More, Vice Dean Internationalization, fellow academics, students, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor and privilege for me to welcome you and to open this event on behalf of our Executive Dean, Professor Kammila Naidoo of the Faculty of Humanities, who unfortunately cannot be here this morning, but it is indeed a great pleasure for me to fulfill this role. So please allow me a few moments to just make a few remarks about this event and how we also got here. So throughout this year, the University of Johannesburg has embarked on a series of initiatives. These were focused on marking 30 years of democracy in South Africa. And our faculty especially has been very, very active in this regard because of its positionality around building and growing democracy in South Africa. We've hosted very gracefully the President and Deputy President of South Africa and other members of the National Executive, and we fostered platforms to reflect on South Africa's liberation journey. Our academics have gone out to educate the electorate. As you know, we had our elections this year, and in that we tried to encourage democratic participation in our country. But we also did that to better understand and learn from voters themselves about their experiences of their democracy and how their lives have changed over the past 30 years. Our scholars have also engaged with social media platforms and the media in general to diagnose and combat the phenomena of mis- and disinformation during election cycles. This, of course, we know is a global challenge, shared across regions as demonstrated by its presence in a foregrounded theme also in today's discussion. Scholarship is absolutely critical for the sustenance and growth of democracies. The humanities and social sciences, perhaps definitely more so. These disciplines provide a basis for critical thinking and appraisal about the present, the past, and the future. Over the previous 2 decades of its existence, the University of Johannesburg's Faculty of Humanities has contributed immensely to this scholarship. Our 13 departments, 8 centers, each have an important focus on aspect of South Africa's democratic journey and development. We are also very proud that we are able to help shape democratic citizens in the form, of course, of our students. They are also future leaders through a curriculum that we believe is grounded in social justice, decolonization, and ethical foundation. Today's event and gathering of leading scholars who have contributed and continue to contribute to the study of policy and society in South Africa, Lithuania, and beyond is really great to see, and we're very grateful to also host them. It is important to have this internationalized space so that we can interface with these members of the diplomatic community and decision makers from these democracies, some of whom, of course, are considered young or new democracies. As countries, we share many historical parallels and contemporary challenges when it comes to overcoming oppression, and that's why today is so important and significant. So we look forward to an intellectually stimulating conversation that will also result, hopefully, in recommendations and policy proposals that we can learn from the past and foster stronger institutions for the future. I'm now honored to invite Her Excellency Ambassador Rasa Jankauskaitė to address us. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Vice Dean Corny Mendes, dear students, dear colleagues, and I am especially honored by the attendance of struggle veterans Joyce and Elizabeth, as I strongly believe that without knowing history, there is no way to build a future. That's why it's so important that you share your stories about your struggles and past. As we meet here today, we mark significant milestone, 30 years of democracy in South Africa and Lithuania. We stand as testaments to resilient, embodying the strength of a people committed to freedom and justice. For Lithuania, 30 years ago marked the rebirth of our nation as we reclaimed independence after nearly 50 decades under Soviet rule. For South Africa, it signified the end of apartheid. While our histories may seem very different on the surface, they converge in our shared experiences of overcoming repressions and reclaiming self-determination. And I think there was no better way to honor 30 years of democracies in South Africa as nominating L.B. Sachs, whose family coming from Lithuania, nominating by Lithuanian State Award. And we have much more people whose families came from Lithuania who joined the struggle against apartheid here in South Africa, like Joe Slovo and many others, which we are very proud of that. Today, as we reflect on the achievements born on those struggles, we also face new challenges that test our resolve. Democracies, especially young ones, carry both the scars of the past injustice and the weight of ongoing threats to our institutions and societies. It is in confronting these challenges that we can gain strength from each other's experience. The stories of our nations are not only about the triumph of democracy, but also about the hard work needed to sustain it. As both Lithuania and South Africa have learned, the legacies of past oppressions do not simply vanish with independence or a new constitution. These legacies linger, influencing the development of democratic institutions and the resilience of our societies. We have each faced unique obstacles. Yet, it's precisely through grappling with these issues that we see the importance of building robust institutions and strong societies that can withstand pressures from both within and outside our borders. Our histories have taught us that democracy is neither a given nor a gift. It is a right that must be earned and protected. Lithuania's fight for independence, followed by the recovery of its democratic institutions, mirrors South Africa's journey out of apartheid and towards a just and inclusive society. Despite different struggles, both nations are united by a commitment to principles that uphold freedom, transparency, and justice. One of the most pressing issues we face today that resonates deeply with Lithuania is the ongoing Russia's war against Ukraine. Russia's continued invasion of Ukraine is a stark reminder that the struggle for sovereignty and self-determination remain as relevant today as it was 30 years ago. This war is not simply an attack on Ukraine. It is an attack on the principles that underlie international peace and stability. It serves as a brutal reminder of the cost of freedom and the need for solidarity among democratic nations. Lithuania knows all too well the dangers of imperial ambitions and the importance of united response. Our own history under Soviet occupation has left us with a profound understanding of the value of sovereignty and of necessity to stand firm against those who would undermine it. For this reason, Lithuania is unwavering in support for Ukraine, recognizing in their fight echoes of our own past struggles. It is disheartening to witness public statements, including here in South Africa, suggesting a distorted view of the conflict by placing blame not on the aggressor Russia, but on the victim, Ukraine. This narrative, often promoted by Russian misinformation, distorts historical truth. We must confront such narratives with facts and remind ourselves that solidarity with Ukraine is not only a moral imperative, but also commitment to the principles of democracy, freedom, and international law. This academic discussion offers us invaluable opportunity to engage in meaningful dialogue about these shared principles. It is a moment to reflect on the achievements of the past 3 decades, but also to recognize that our work is far from complete. Here we have the chance to learn from each other, to share insights, and to strengthen the institutions and societies that protect our democracies. Let us remember that the power of democracy lies not only in freedom it provides, but in responsibility it demands. Lithuania and South Africa, through their struggles and triumphs, have shown the world that even in the face of gravest challenges, democracy can prevail. But for it to continue to thrive, we must remain vigilant in protecting it, standing firm in our values, and supporting one another in pursuit of justice and peace. As we engage in today's discussions, I hope we are inspired by the paths of our nations have taken and reminded of the common causes that unite us. Our democracies are strongest when we stand together, confront legacies honestly, and to work to ensure that our institutions and societies can withstand the pressures of today's world. Let us leave here today more resolved than ever to uphold the principles of freedom, justice, respect for rights of all people. Thank you for being here, and may today's discussion be a source for insights, inspirations, and mutual commitment to the future of democracy. Thank you.
Right, once again, thank you so much to Her Excellency Ms. Rasa Jankauskaitė. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are now moving to the second phase of the program of today's conference. As you can see from the programs, we've organized 2 panels. Right? So the first one looks at how historic oppressions are visible on the path of 30 years of democracy and freedom. So we'll go straight into this panel. I will now hand over to the moderator of this panel, Mr. Dennis River, who will be facilitating the discussions that we'll be having now as they are making their way to the front. Let us give them a round of applause. Thank you. Enjoy, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, I have the privilege to chair the first session. My name is Dennis Riva. I'm a researcher at the Institute for Security Studies. It's Mr. Dennis Riva, which is a bit scary because I'm moderating, a panel with professors and doctors, but we'll see how it goes. But the topic of this panel is of course, very important, very serious. And as we heard this morning, freedom is not free, and we should appreciate the price that was paid and the lingering impact that these oppressive regimes left on the 2 respective countries, South Africa and Lithuania. Both countries emerged as democracies post their independence, but of course, the impact is still felt today. So the objective for this session is threefold. We will start by looking at the impact, sort of this lingering impact of the oppressive regime that it had on the fabric of the society in each respectful country. We will then look at how this experience has shaped the foreign policy approach of the country, its interests and its objectives and priorities. And then we will look to the future in terms of how each country might position itself in this increasingly more divided, more fragmented world that we're witnessing the emergence of. Colleagues, without further ado, and I'm conscious of time, let me pose the first question to the panel. And perhaps as you answer, you can provide just a brief introduction of who you are. We're running through the program. colleagues, with everything that has been said, how has the history of the oppressive regimes, the apartheid regime in South Africa and the Soviet regime, how has it impacted your country's political, social, and economic fabric? And perhaps, sir, we can start with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for that question. So I think the apartheid legacy lingers in two ways. One very positive and the other quite negative. I say positive because we learned the negative lessons of apartheid, and the constitution that we have is determined to construct a society that is a polar opposite of what was there before. So I always say that South Africans, in the transition to democracy and the constitution that they created for themselves, didn't just impose rights on black people which used to be enjoyed only by white people. We went much further than that and created a very progressive constitution with new rights that were previously not enumerated in any constitution anywhere in the world, including the right to dignity. You can search many constitutions in the world, you will not see the right to dignity. I think, ironically, there's only one other country that has in its basic law the jurisprudence of dignity as a human right, and that, you will not believe it, is actually Israel. So only South Africa and Israel have the concept of dignity in their constitutional framework. Israel doesn't have quite a constitution, there's a basic law, but South Africa codified this in its constitution. Then there are also other rights, including the right to strike. Again, you can search far and wide. You'd be hard-pressed to find any other country other than South Africa that has the right to strike. The right to life, in fact, in South Africa, you can even sue for being born, right? You can sue the state. You can sue the state, your parents, for being born. This is the precedent set by Age versus Fetal Assessment Center. This is very unique. So South Africa is a very human rights-centered, human-centered country. At least it aspires towards that. But then there's the negative side in our political landscape, which deeply upsets me, which is the idea of white parties, black parties, right? People think if this party represents this block of the population and this party this block of the population. So that is a very pernicious legacy, which means that this progressive framework, this progressive political landscape, has to accommodate, awkwardly, categories set by the past. And so I would hope that this is something that will change in the near future. Thanks.
Thank you. Professor, oh, well, I think we can
Go.
sure, yeah.
Okay,
Please, you have the floor.
I did not expect that. Yeah, I wanted to hear first South African experience, but yeah. So hello everyone, it's a great pleasure for me to be here. My name is Yeva Gedreitite, and I'm here I think in twofold capacity. So I'm a lecturer at Vilnius University, Political Science. I teach mostly on Latin America, and I'm particularly curious about contemporary global order, global South, and I don't know how to call it, global East, because while we often lump to the West, the question always is, are we not, etc., etc. And also my second capacity, I'm democracy baby. I'm a little bit older than our democracy. I will not tell you how much, but just a little. I was born straight before the Berlin Wall fell. I remember all the protests for independence in Lithuania. I finished university, I started university when we entered European Union, so I'm democracy baby of Lithuania. And when I was hearing what the previous speaker said, I was thinking about what's lingering from our past, and I realized that I think I want to say a few things about what kind of things I think mattered and potentially may affected us. So just to say, okay, so we became independent from the Soviet Union, but what does it mean? What kind of legacies it may have left for us? So what we perceived and what maybe is different from apartheid in terms that there was no racial oppression. We are majority of Lithuanians look like we have same nose, as many foreigners say. And it had the strong feeling for us as being foreign oppression. That's one thing. It was very violent oppression, and the whole regime was built after the Second World War. And the third thing, the Soviet creation of Soviet regime in Lithuania was very disruptive with what we were before. So just to go back a little bit, maybe about the foreign element, I will speak later. But so the Lithuania became Soviet after the Russian occupation. But what is important, we actually had free occupation in 5 years. So there was Soviet occupation in 40s, Nazi occupation after that, and then the Soviet Union came back in 45 and didn't leave us until the 90s. What that meant, so we had 2 totalitarian regimes coming and leaving, creating lots of obviously persecution, and I nearly started crying hearing the freedom fighters talking. It's very sensitive because we do have them too. They are still with us. But also it created opportunities for collaboration with those who oppressed us. And big parts of my society had to live through very traumatic experience from deportations and Holocaust without having any justice. So we couldn't, even when the Soviets came back, we didn't have a proper trials for Nazis' crimes, and then after Soviet Unions, we never had like proper trials of what happened in the 40s. So that's the oppression part. But what was also for our society, the Soviet regime was very disruptive. So Lithuania was agrarian, Catholic country, everyone worked land and sell their, I don't know, beetroots and potatoes, whatever, in the 39. And after the Soviet Union occupation, there was this very strong, very violent creation of transformation of the society in terms of forced atheization, nationalization of all private property, forcing peasants who had a very particular relationship with land, their own land where their grandparents lived, to become rural workers. So removing them from land, moving them to other place, and making them to work in these industrial farms, etc. So where I'm heading with that, there was an attempt to create this very huge state where would be one political system, Communist Party, one economy led by state, and one moral, which would be communist moral. For the country that was very different before. So that created a society that on the one hand was very afraid. So we speak about intergenerational trauma because it's not only the people who live this kind of oppression, but their children and the wider society. It's also the people who collaborated, sometimes with 2 regimes. And all these kind of silences that sink into the people, into the learning, do not participate, do not be active, do not be proactive, etc., etc. And on the other hand, the people learned to mistrust the state. And as the state was everything, you would mistrust your neighbor, you would mistrust the economy. Everything will move in the back economy. People will say one thing in public, but then the other thing in the kitchen, behind the closed doors, and would feel often very cynical about any political ideology, any political institutions, etc. So in the 90s, we said, yes, we want to be independent, we want to create a democracy, but then you have society with quite few traumas, and 50 years of no democratic participation saying, hey, we will create a democracy. And that was difficult. Mistrust in political institutions was difficult. There was a difficult attempt to trust each other and to believe that your voice matters and to create institutions for whom people would matter as well. Also, I think we as you said, we created opposite for what we had. So the third option was, yes, I'm finishing, moving extremely to the capitalist and individualist economy, a little bit forgetting about the public good, and all these kind of things. So many of these things, I think, are much better now. I think we are becoming more solidar inside of the country and outside, learning more about the world. But I think we still need more time to really learn to live in the society where your voice matters. And also our politicians are learning to create the institutions where our voice matters. And I think that's also some interesting lessons, what you say about dignity, etc., that we can actually learn from you. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mateme.
I just wanted to stand and pay homage to Omama, Abasluela, ngabasikho khona la namhlanje, abasikho asihlezi la sihlezi khona. Sicela ukusibonga siyabonga Professor Ndzendze lento yenzile ukuthi uhlale ulethe umama ngoba ngiyacabanga ukuthi bayasibusisa. Bayasibusisa, so ngicela ukubonga. Ngiyabonga mama, ngiyabonga bomama. I was just thanking the mothers of the revolution. So maybe let me, greetings everyone. Sure, we're running. Just to pause and greet everyone and acknowledge everyone and say Sanbonani, I see you. And thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to start off where you kind of, left off, because my work, I'm going to situate my response within the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is based on some of the work that I've done. So the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, was of course brought to life by an act called the Promotion of Reconciliation and sorry, I forgot the full name. I'll get back to it. I'm just coming into the talk, which was actually in 1995. So 1996, Reconciliation Reparations Act of 1995. And then in 96, the hearings begin all around the country. Why this moment is important for me, I think in terms of what countries ought to do after war, we tend to focus, especially post-reconstruction, there's a lot of focus on the political aspect, right? The political actors, the public political, the elite, ultimately who negotiate the transition, etc. So this indeed also happened with the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But my work, what I focus on is I actually listen to the narrations of the women. So over 20,000 women came to speak, 20,000 people rather came forward as victims at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And what fascinates me is that the majority of these women were African women. So I call the TRC actually one of the largest archives where we hear African women actually speak. Of course, there was a very clear political agenda which was laid out in the actual act itself, the Reconciliation Reparation Act, which was about building a nation. But what these women did, what I was interested in, is how they subverted that narrative, how they came to the fore through their narrative. They began to bring forward their own notions of what had gone wrong under apartheid without them being directly asked to do so, right? So the commission, basically, those who don't know, there were three committees. There was the Reparation Commission, the Human Rights Committee, which heard over 20,000 victims of human rights violation between 1960 and 1994. And then you also had, yes, as I mentioned, the reparation, of course, the amnesty, which was very, very controversial, right? So what did the women say? One of the central things that came out from the work that I've done, I've analyzed these testimonies, and one of the central things is the breakdown of the family structure, the breakdown of the community structure. One of the things you'll find being centered in these women's narratives is the centrality of death and how women dealt with death. One of the central things that these women center in their narratives is the breaking of the social fabric, the ties that bind people together, the values, the social moral values that sustain communities. There's a huge amount of narratives, even when the commissioners are trying to kind of make them answer a certain way, they divert the women and they talk about the pain of seeing the communities disintegrate. They talk about how they maintain the everyday, right? They talk about the silences you talk about. There's a lot about how silences were used both to protect young people, but also to recreate an imagined normal society that wasn't there. What do I mean by that? In the night, ba, 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 you hear the guns. In the morning, the mothers make breakfast, put the uniform, go to school, right? So women were, so what does it say? So there's, in terms of, the question of the history of oppression and how it kind of, it lingers on. I think women's testaments, if you hear them for what I call them as alternative sensory memory sites, if you understand them as that and where they point, where women are pointing you to, they point us to the most basic but the most important value system that holds us together, the social fabric of the community, and how regimes of oppression actually target and absolutely tear into pieces the social fabric of those communities, and how that lingers on, decades later. And again, as I said, I think the issue of death that Mama spoke about, you have also mentioned, women's testimonies in the TRC bring this issue of death over and over again. Death, not only, and remember within an African context, I'll just end up, within an African context, there's the issue of death, of the missing. So when you have not buried someone, so missing death, forgotten deaths, all of these kinds of issues that linger on that we have not quite resolved as well. I'll leave it there.
Colleagues, I really have the worst job today, and that is to put a stop to these conversations and move the conversation forward, unfortunately. But I think you would agree with me that each one of these questions would deserve a panel on its own. But perhaps we can continue this conversation beyond this event. But moving on, and something you mentioned, Prof, about the negative and the positives that came from this experience, and one of the positives is the respect for human life, for freedom. And we've seen sort of this play out in both countries. Both countries are democracies, but in terms of their foreign policy, this is where, interestingly, we might see a bit of a divergence, a bit of different approach. So I was wondering, for the second question to the panel, how has this experience of oppression and liberation, shape the foreign policy position and priorities of your respective country? And sir, perhaps we can start with you again.
Thanks, Dennis. So, in foreign policy, most of us are hypocrites. You are bound to violate some principle that you set up for yourself. And so South Africa's foreign policy has gone through, I would say, phases. There was the Mandela, perhaps early Mbeki phase, where human rights was at the forefront of South Africa's foreign policy, and it shaped our lens as to how we viewed the world. And that still lives on in some respects, particularly when you look at South Africa's position on Palestine, which is a non-negotiable for even this government, right? Even the post-May government, but more so for the ANC, exclusively ANC-dominated government of '94 to May or June of this year. Also, the question of Western Sahara, that's also been part of South Africa's human rights-focused foreign policy. But as I said, in foreign policy, we're bound to violate some principles. Helpfully, in IR, international relations, we can call them paradoxes, right? When you want to not call something hypocritical, you say it's paradoxical. And I say South Africa is paradoxical. South Africa's foreign policy is paradoxical because then on similar situations where there is clearly a David versus Goliath, South Africa tends to favor the Goliath, right? You can look at Taiwan and China, China and Hong Kong, Ukraine and Russia, Georgia and Russia in 2008, Ukraine and Russia over Crimea in 2014, where South Africa has sided with the villain of the story. Let's be frank, the villain of the story. And so squaring this paradox then means understanding who is in charge of South Africa. And it is historically, the last 30 years, the ANC, which has a tie to Russia. But there again, I'm always left stumped, and maybe somebody can help us understand as to why, because the Soviet Union, which did help the ANC train and fight against apartheid, but the Soviet Union was composed of 15 republics, not just Russia. There was Lithuania, there was Latvia, there was Estonia, there was Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and so on and so on. But why is it that Russia then, there was Ukraine within that Soviet Union, but I don't understand why it is that then, and many of our struggle veterans actually trained in Ukraine. This is common knowledge as to why Russia then is the sole country to inherit that goodwill. And I think this tells us that Ambassador Jankauskaitė and her colleagues have a lot of work to do in helping us understand the proper history in its fuller context, so that South Africa's foreign policy can be more consistent. It's not just Russia that helped. Many, many countries helped. Countries you've never even heard of helped to liberate this country. And so South Africa's foreign policy has had somewhat of a human rights focused, but it often has to coincide with the interests of the ruling coalition or the ruling party, whatever the case may be. So I'll end it there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I was, many years ago, I attended a summer school in Budapest, and when I was there, it was, there were only two of us were from the continent, and it was mainly made up of colleagues from Eastern Europe. It was my first time in Hungary, and just being amongst, you know, colleagues from mostly that part of Europe. So what struck me when I was there was the similarities of our experiences. I was struck by the similarities of our experiences of oppression, the mothers of the revolution, the freedom fighters, as you spoke about, the silences, we spoke about that actually as well. Mothers who were responsible for maintaining the everyday, the social fabric, and really just keeping survival, you know, going. So in terms of answering your question, maybe I'm kind of not answering, not answering. I'm not a foreign affairs expert, but what I will say is I think these kinds of foreign policy should be looking at a much more broader idea of what foreign policy ought to be. I think it does not include aspects, or if it does, it's at a very kind of marginal or add-on perspective around the social fabric. So what that then does is then it also marginalizes women and their role in these liberation movements and struggle, and what is important, what women bring to the table, and say this is indeed important towards maintaining peace. So as I was saying, from the narratives, these issues come through. So yes, I think you know, a foreign policy going forward should be looking at aspects of the social fabric, should be looking at issues like social, ethical, moral breakdown, should be looking, centralizing women's roles in this, acknowledging and centralizing women's role in building back our homes, which were destroyed by oppression. Oppression, I say, you know, what happens during oppression is you have the state, the signifiers of the state entering the most private, which is the home, right? So all of these things, women were directly affected, women were the center, so it's about also centering the very important role of women in the reconstruction of our families and our society. I think it's also around the issue of the dead. So women bring this issue, because it's women who carry the grieving, who carry the burial, and all of these things. So they centralize this importance of death. And I'll just end off in terms of the South African context, is that what it brought to also, I think, the fore when we listen to women and how can they inform us broadening our ideas of social policy by including the social aspects. They speak a lot about the centrality of African spirituality. They speak a lot about African pharmacology, right? The use of the earth, the use of natural sort of, you know, the environment as part of the healing process. So women centrally have a very holistic sense of what is healing and what is peace, which includes the individual, the community, the ancestral, what we cannot see, the spiritual, as well as the environment. So very powerful, and I think we can learn a lot in terms of hopefully informing a broader foreign policy.
Yeah, so here, the feminist foreign policy, please. Yeah, so thank you. It's a good question, and I'm in you know, being afraid that I will not be invited by the embassy here again if I say that our foreign policy is a little bit paradoxical as well from time to time. But I'll come back to that. But I think I would like a little bit maybe to explain a little bit where some of our paradoxes come from. So if you want to understand Lithuanian approach to foreign policy, you have to understand the fragility of our nation, the existence of our nation. So we actually share the same mother nation roots with Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland. The country that disappeared from the map in late 18th century. It was occupied by Catherine the Great, Russian Empire, and it disappeared from the map of the world. And it's, if you can watch on YouTube, there are like, the videos of European borders changing. So then you have country and then boom, you have no country. It reappeared in the 1910 to only again disappear in the 40s. So again, you have country and then boom, you do not have country. So we reappeared in the map again in the 1991, but in the 1990, but we had a joke actually. When we reached 20 years of independence, me and my friends were saying, okay, the clock is ticking. How long, much do we have, And every time, and this is related because we also perceive, and there's a little bit difficult for us to somehow help, to embrace the other nations in the Soviet Union, impact to African countries or to global South countries, non-aligned movement, because we really felt Soviet Union as the extension of Russian imperialism. And if you listen to Mr. Putin, he actually quite makes the same argument, talking about the Russia and its rights, etc., etc. So our foreign policy is very much so focused on surviving. So we are really afraid and we are really very wary of Russia. And our reading of what can we do to sort of exist is obviously was this pro-EU, pro-NATO position. So I sometimes hear, especially I work with Latin America, so the NATO expanded to Eastern Europe. We did everything for NATO to accept us. We were saying, we do everything, please accept us now, because that's our security guarantee. And so that's a very important part. But the second part, and there comes the little bit of tension, we see the US as the main insurer of security for us. And the problems with that are that US is not very multilateralist actor. So we is trying to put those two things together, seeing multilateral, so organizations, and also relying on the US. And then we have this solidarity and this our, very particular feeling, obviously, with Ukraine. So what happened in Ukraine, the attack, we really perceived it with this vicarious identification. As I understand, for example, Palestinian issue is somehow similar for South African, but we feel as it happened to us. When the attack happened, I couldn't eat. My hands were shaking. I was just scrolling the social media, like, it's happening again. Oh my God, they're doing this again, So Ukraine issue for us is like the issue, but also we have the sympathy for Taiwan, because we also associate ourselves strongly, what does it mean to be next to the big power that can eat you up, and some other countries. But again, there are some paradoxes, and our human rights and democratization agenda might expand actually broader, but it's always filtrated by this question, will any change in the global system lead to our existence, or actually it may peril it?
So I'm very mindful of the time here, but you mentioned, in fact, paradoxes was sort of being mentioned again and again, and I think it's very fitting for a second and last question for this panel, and that is, I think what we're witnessing is the retreat of rules-based order. At least it's being weakened. The system doesn't work as it's supposed to be working. And what we're seeing is the emergence of regional blocs, alliances, multilateralism, but it's not yet quite clear multilateralism that is inclusive or that is sort of restrictive to a club of powerful nations. But following on what has been said, and looking forward, what are sort of the main priorities for your country, especially in terms of this emerging world, perhaps divided, perhaps less stable? Sir.
All right. Thanks, Dennis. So I love South Africa very much, and I always have to kind of pinch myself to make sure I'm answering a question of the South Africa that is, or the South Africa that I want and that I know can be, right? And when it comes to our foreign policy, I think actually there needs to be a going back to the drawing board, because we find that we don't have much consistency in terms of foreign policy, as alluded to earlier. And one of the key points of tension is our economic foreign policy versus our political foreign policy. And so you look at BRICS, for example. We've been in BRICS now for quite some time. I don't know quite how long, maybe 12, 13 years. And when you watch South Africa's trade with BRICS, they are eating our lunch. BRICS is eating South Africa's lunch. The trade deficit is just widening and widening and widening. And they are buying raw materials. And these are our partners of choice in the world. And then you compare to the EU. I'm not glorifying the EU. I think it's very problematic and exploitative towards other African countries. But the EU's actually, in some years, South Africa has a trade surplus. So can you imagine trade deficit with 4 other countries, but a trade surplus with 28 countries? And majority of the top exports that South Africa sends to Europe and to the US for that matter are manufactured goods, actually. Go and check the statistics on this when the numbers speak for themselves in that regard. And so what should be South Africa's foreign policy? I wish South Africa would focus on building its economy first through its diplomacy, because there is this tension, this cognitive dissonance between the economic foreign policy, which clearly has seen benefits from some countries. We've given BRICS a lot of goodwill, and it hasn't delivered. I would ask anybody here to tell me 2 things, or just one thing that the BRICS has done for South Africa, versus the political foreign policy, right? And so there is this tension that I hope can be squared, and then South Africa can go out there and have a large voice. And a lot of it actually comes down to what Prof. Ntabiseng has spoken about, which is the need to rebuild the domestic fabric of South Africa. And then you can go out there and have a voice. But right now, South Africa's voice, I mean, it's not backed by any material substance. I think we need a strong military. I think we need a strong economy. And then you can go out there and maybe somebody will actually listen to what you have to say in the world. Thanks.
Thank you. And I enjoy that you don't shy away from sort of pushing these perhaps points that are not commonly held, which would do wonders for our Q&A session that will follow after this panel. But please, ma'am.
Thank you. I was feeling a little bit like not the foreign policy expert, so thank you for the affirmation there. Mine will just be on 2 points around the TRC itself and then more broadly. So in terms of the TRC itself, as I mentioned, over 20,000 people came and, spoke at the commission under the human rights violation ambit. But we've seen very little in terms of the reparations commission. Very little work was done by the reparations commission, and this is a problem. I think this is something that lingers. This is something we need to confront as South Africans. There was also, in terms of amnesty, over 6,000 individuals applied for amnesty. As you know, these were mostly state, I want to say officials, but people mainly coming from the police and the army, the apartheid regime police and the army, all right? And over 5,000 applied and only over 1,000 were granted. So what's happened to those? Are there prosecutions happening? I've heard somebody was saying we're heading soon towards 30 years of the TRC in the next year or 2. And somebody, because I follow it a bit, I know there are prosecutions as we speak of some of these apartheid police, etc., that are happening right now. But it's all very quiet, so I find it very interesting that we're not seeing it in the media, but it is indeed, it's happening as we head towards 30 years of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So there's a lot of unfinished business that's happening there. On a sort of broader sense, in terms of where do you go forward, I'll sing the same song I've been singing, which is it's this whole idea of the global and the local, right? Is really having this notion of the glocal. I find that, when we're talking foreign affairs, these kind of, very important global politics, we often start to not speak about the local. issues as well. And it's simply, for me, I think it's about this integration, which is not always easy. It's often paradoxical, contradictory, et cetera, but it's an important thing to bring back to the table. So it is important to bring back to the table issues around social fabric, social cohesion. Our families are broken, you know, and they didn't break yesterday. This is as part of what my colleague has said of intergenerational trauma that is seeing itself, it's rearing its ugly head. So the issue of family, centralizing those social institutions, you spoke about way forward future, centralizing those institutions that support that, centralizing community institutions. If you go to many black areas in South Africa today, what we call townships, shanty towns, tin cities, informal settlements, there's no place that is social to go in, I don't know, what do people do? Play soccer, basketball? There are no spaces for that, even in the city itself. So it's around reinvestment of those social institutions as well, and making them part and parcel of the much bigger, grander, very important debates of politics and, you know, foreign policy, etc. Embedding those in there, because actually that's where it starts. If we're not getting it right there, we can have all the grandiose policy, they're not going to have an impact. So it's about how do these, you know, issues of moral fabric, moral fiber, social cohesion, and it's not even a feminist plea. Women do play a central role in this, whether you're a feminist or not. Even if you're an old gogo, it's because women give birth and there's that connection, you know, to kind of that intergeneration, the next generation, and concern over that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just a little bit taking on what you just said. You know, when I was thinking, coming here, so how should I say, like, how would I feel that our democracy got better? Like, why would I say that? I could look at indicators, etc. But then I realized there are more protests, and there are more neighborhoods protesting developmental projects of the city. So, you know, saying, don't destroy our park, don't cut the trees, at least in city, in the capital where I live, and they win more often. So I thought, okay, that's a good sign that democracy is improving, and actually it's very important for people to feel solidarity for the world, a little bit to feel solidarity for each other. So I think it's also, social policy somehow is related actually with the foreign policy. But talking about foreign policy, that should be, and I think just few things to say. So Lithuanian foreign policy, and I think we just had elections, so the outgoing government, one of their political strategists wrote an op-ed describing the principles of Lithuanian foreign policy. That was the first time I saw an op-ed. I said, like, wow, we're thinking about foreign policy, good. And they described the key notion is that Lithuania needs to have a global system when small countries like Lithuania can exist. And I think that's a very important imperative, and doesn't matter which government. For now, we had this agreement that we need to enter NATO and EU, but we look for. However, as I said, very often this understanding was shaped that we need to support the US-led global order because we feel value close, obviously, but it has few challenges, especially after the elections now. I think that will have few challenges. And we will have to adopt how to strengthen European actorness and also, you know, to attend this our plea. But there is just one thing I want to say related to global order, which I think I just want to share it as invitation for understanding. So many colleagues of mine I work with in Latin America, they're very happy about multipolar world. So they're saying US power is weakening, so multipolar world is really, you know, great for us, etc. In Eastern Europe, we are a little bit wary of that because multipolar world in our previous experience were European empires dividing the world. And there is a fear that this world order that allowed us to emerge in the map again may be dismantled. And the alternative, and when I hear Russia or China talking about multipolar world, I always ask, like, what kind of world do we talk about? And I think we have a challenge as a small country, and with this I finish, Because so far, Lithuania, we were a little bit parochial. We're very small, 2.8 million people. So I don't know how many people live in Pretoria or Johannesburg, but you know. So we really looked at ourselves, our region, and Russia, and the US to say so, like a little bit this closest security guarantors or threats.
So I think we might have perhaps five minutes or so to engage in Q&A, reflect on what we heard, discuss. You know, these are challenging, it's a challenging topic, so perhaps sometimes you just need a few minutes to think about it. Hopefully the speakers are not running away after this session, so perhaps you can catch them during a coffee break and harass them with your questions. Colleagues, any questions? So there is 1, 2, 3.
Good day, everyone. So I have 2 questions. The first one is for Professor Ndzendze. And with regards to India having good relations with the West and the BRICS countries, what do you think South Africa could do differently in terms of foreign policy to sort of also mediate between the two? And for Dr. Aiva, do you believe with America sort of separating itself from NATO, do you think Russia would get ideas of sort of taking back the countries that were part of the Soviet Union? Is there like a fear in Lithuania of such issues? Thank you.
Thank you. My question is for Prof. Bhaso. You said something so controversial about the BRICS and you want the military power to be stronger in South Africa so we'd make a difference. Can you elaborate on that? Thank you.
Go ahead. There's a 3rd question and...
Thank you. Aphasia silly, but try. You know, Russia, Ukraine, and this one, confusion sort of, you know. And why? I don't know. You know, South Africa, Cuba, and Russia helped South Africa. But now, silly perhaps or whatever, you know. But anyway, and then South Africa, Triassic, when the Triassic, but music, no speech, whatever, completely, and write a letter, Muruti to and no. Perhaps, but anyway, lots and lots and lots, so we forgot anyway. And then Palestinian and Israel, why? I don't understand logic, you know. But anyway, said Palestinian and Russia. Now, US won this same thing exactly, friends, so same story. Palestino, Israel and Russia, UK or whatever, same stories, but I hope next year it change. You know. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for the questions. So you spot on, India gets it. India sees BRICS for what it is, which is basically a China-dominated formation of 5 countries that fit awkwardly together. They don't share much of the same values. Russia, China, and for a while Brazil were ruled by very anti-human rights regimes. And that's the instability of BRICS, because it used to be progressive, had progressive potential when there was a certain type of leader in almost all 5 countries. But it's this formation that, by the way, does not even have a treaty, BRICS, so we don't know what it is. It doesn't know what it is. If you look at the documents, sometimes it refers to itself as an association, sometimes it calls itself a forum, sometimes it calls itself a platform. And India knows very well that it cannot throw in its future with the BRICS because it has territorial disputes with China. And so it knows there and then the limitations of BRICS. BRICS is not going to be a free trade area because India suffers more than most countries the brunt of cheap Chinese goods that are swamping its market. There's been protests and all sorts of negative reactions. BRICS is not going to be a sort of counter NATO. It's not going to be a new NATO because these countries will never throw in their sovereignty. I mean, Russia and China have quite a state of enmity between the two of them. I've seen in some Chinese maps what we call Vladivostok, which is part of Russia. In some Chinese maps is shaded as part of China. Why? Because it was taken from China by Russia in the Treaty of Beijing in 1860. And so China is aware, and some Chinese have told me this, that this is the next battle of the next 100 years, to try and reacquire Vladivostok, what is called Vladivostok, which has somewhat of a considerable Chinese population. So BRICS, for me, is dead on arrival. And so it makes sense to be like India, to balance these forces, because that ensures that you have a seat at the table. So that's very important. And then a strong military, I mean, Eva has put it well, a country's first responsibility is to ensure its survival. And maybe with the end of apartheid, we thought we are now living in a friendly neighborhood. But the world is always changing. And the new threat now is the transnational phenomenon we call terrorism. I would love to see anyone here who would raise their hand if I said, do you feel safe and confident that this country is safe from terrorism? I think that's, almost nobody would raise their hand. We're all vulnerable, and South Africa more so because our military is probably at its weakest since its foundation in 1912. So a strong military to ensure your own security and to ensure a safer neighborhood for the region is just indispensable, is just indispensable. So I hope I've answered your question there. Thanks.
I don't think I was asked a direct question, but maybe it's just to add what Prof. Ndzendze was saying now about the prerogative of each country is for survival. So my response coming from the perspective I come from would be if our families are not surviving, if our communities are not surviving, you know, this is a serious issue. Because if there's a disintegration, we see it now. Many of you maybe are reading the newspapers, are familiar what's going on, the big social crisis we have with food. Over 30 children died in the past few months from eating contaminated foods, so these things are happening. So if we're not, the survival of our very idea of this beautiful country, which I also love very much, called South Africa, if we do not take care of those micro institutions, those social institutions, we're also in great danger of not surviving as well. And just to add also on the issue of, I forgot and I'll add later. There was something else I wanted to add. It's gone. I'll pass over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's a little bit about Russia and a little bit what you said. It's confusing. There was Soviet Union and then suddenly they're splitting and et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, Russia, as current Russian state, is taking, and if you listen to Putin's discourses, which I do sadly analyze because I found them particularly triggering for me, honestly, my hands start shaking when I read them, because they're telling we are this great state since the 18th century. We control this part of the world, including the Soviet Union, though Soviet Union theoretically was created by Ukraine as well, and Belarus and Georgia, etc., etc. But we are that country. We have rights over those countries. We can omit that actually the process of creation of Soviet Union was bloody for those involved and those who didn't want. And we have a right to repeat that. So that's a little bit what he says, and just so I don't have proofs. I don't know, would Russia attack us if we would not be in NATO? I don't know. I would have said, that Russia would not attack Ukraine in the full-scale invasion up to, let's say, February 2022. I would say it's illogical. Why? Sanctions, whatever, why you do that kind of things? And they did that. And just three-point stories, nothing, for conclusions, but one story is, it was, I think, December 2021, so before Russian full-scale invasion. On Russian TV, there was a show where two presenters discussed how Russia would invade Baltic states. So they have maps, they were drawing arrows, they have people in study laughing. So we would enter through there, we would bomb them, we would disconnect them from NATO, and no one will come, ha, ha, ha. The same we did in Donbass. Which was Eastern Ukraine, which according to them was a different story, but well. So does it make me feel safe? Not at all. The other, when the full-scale invasion started, there were people in Russia that put on their cars stickers saying to Berlin, so the Second World War, we will go to Berlin, or we can repeat. We can repeat, it's the Second World War, we can go back and we can control you, etc., etc. And then when February, when the full-scale invasion started, the third and last story, my friend, she was texting me laughing that her mother was in total distress. She was crying and she was trembling that, the war has started, the occupation again is coming, etc. And at some point she grabbed the cat, went to the window, started the petting the cat and saying, "Don't worry, kitten, you're NATO kitten. Don't worry, you're NATO kitten." So nothing like that will happen because we belong to NATO. So in short, I don't know. But Russia tells that it has a right to do that. And it makes me as a citizen, me as a scholar, me as a human being, and us as a policymakers worry about that constantly. And I think if something that Russia proved with their February full-scale invasion of Ukraine, that NATO makes sense for us, not for everyone, and that's, I understand all the stories. And case of Sweden and Finland that didn't want to enter NATO shows that actually we feel that, and the plea of Ukraine to become a member of NATO indicates that there is this feeling of threat by Russian neighbors now. So I don't know, but I can't stop being afraid of that.
I remembered what I wanted to say in the sort of more general comment. The more general comment was around my very naive observation, very kind of, as I said, I'm not a foreign policy expert, but I see in global policy this sort of receding of the minority, right? The receding of the smaller countries, the importance of the smaller countries, the refugee, the immigrant, the black, the woman, the child. So there's this something which is really, really concerning, because in terms of the moral politique of the, of global politics, surely those should be what is at the center and what is driving, the moral basis of these global foreign policy, political standpoints. But we see a receding and the re-emergence of the big man politics, which sort of squashes everybody down. So that's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
No, colleagues, thank you very much once again to the panel. We took a little bit of time from your coffee and the other panel, actually, but I think it was worth it. And of course, it's not the end of a conversation. I hope we can continue with this conversation moving forward. Thank you, colleagues, and once again, round of applause for our panelists.